So last December 10, Nuclear Hot Seat number 129 featured an interview with Charles Bonner, an attorney for the sailors of the USS Ronald Reagan, in their case against Tokyo Electric Power Company for putting them in harm's way when they were first responders to the earthquake and tsunami on March 11, 2011. That interview went viral and blew the roof off the story in mainstream media around the world, at least as far as mainstream media was willing to go. Now, last Thursday, February 6th, the case was refiled in San Diego Federal Court. Nuclear Hot Seat caught up with Attorney Bonner the day after to get an update on the case.
Charles Bonner, welcome back to Nuclear Hot Seat.
Thank you, Libbe. Good to be back. Thank you for taking the time and revisiting this very important topic and this very important lawsuit.
When we first spoke, it was back in December, and it was used on Nuclear Hot Seat number 129. And at that point, you had filed suit in court in San Diego against TEPCO on behalf of, at that time, 29 of the sailors from the USS Ronald Reagan. Give us a review of what the circumstances were back then, and we'll take it into the present.
Yes, when we initially filed, on behalf of I believe it was a total of approximately 51 plaintiffs. The judge had a viewpoint that we were invading the territory of the President of the United States, the executive power, with the way in which we had structured the complaint, and that we were making the allegations that Tokyo Electric Power Company had essentially defrauded the United States government by concealing the levels of radiation. So we amended the lawsuit, and we now have increased the number of injured sailors from 51 to 81, and even though we filed a lawsuit last night, we received 2 additional names today. They continue to call. They continue to report tumors, cancers, leukemias, and various other radiation-related illnesses. The major difference between the first lawsuit and this second lawsuit is that the first lawsuit was what is called a mass action. We now have filed a class action. The difference between a mass action and a class action is that with the mass action, we assume on behalf of each plaintiff as an individual person, and only those people who are named in the complaint would be covered for claims. In contrast to the class action now will embrace claims for all 70,000 people who were exposed, 70,000 Americans who were exposed to radiation through this Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster. And that 70,000 includes 24,000 sailors, 5,500 of whom were on the USS Ronald Reagan, which was one of the first ships in the United States Navy 7th Fleet to respond to this disaster to provide humanitarian aid.
According to an article in Stars and Stripes, the suit has expanded to include those who served aboard the USS Essex and the USS Germantown, as well as attached Marines. Are they now covered in this suit?
All of the sailors in the 7th Fleet who responded are now covered in this class action, and that includes the entire 24,000 sailors, as well as other Americans who were involved in some kind of way in providing assistance to Japan, either sailors who were stationed there or soldiers who were there, as well as the various sailors who responded on the various ships, the USS Ronald Reagan, the USS George Washington, the USS Fitzgerald, and all the other ships that were involved in the 7th Fleet, which is about 10 to 12 ships. So with this particular class action lawsuit, all of those individuals are included. And it includes now at least 81 named plaintiffs. That is, people who already signed up and whose names are included in the lawsuit.
Can additional sailors sign on to this suit?
Yes, and any sailor who is experiencing any kind of illness or who has any fear that he or she may contract some illness in the future should contact us so that they can be signed on as a named plaintiff. It is very important that they contact us, even though we filed the lawsuit as a class action. The court still has to certify this case as a class action. If the court does not certify the class, then only those individuals who are named will be able to pursue claims. So we encourage everyone who feels that they have a claim either based on an existing known injury, a sickness, or the fear contracting an illness. And I want to stress this latter part. The claims that we have made allows individuals to sue for the injury of a fear, of a worry, of an anxiety of contracting cancer or some form of radiation illness, such as leukemia, a thyroid problems, a thyroid cancer in the future. So if a sailor does not have presently an illness, if an illness has not manifested itself, but yet the sailor is worried as a fear that he or she may contract cancer in the future, they can sign on and become a plaintiff to be compensated for that fear under the laws of the state of California.
What is the current circumstance with the filing? What is the process now within the courts as you move forward? Is this an acknowledged lawsuit at this time, or do you still have to wait for the court to get back to you?
No lawsuit is a guaranteed. Every lawsuit has to ultimately go through a process where the court has to agree to let the lawsuit proceed forward. Defendants in this case, TEPCO, they have a host of lawyers who will be making motions to dismiss the lawsuit. We will oppose those motions, and the judge will rule. But we are totally confident that we are going to win this lawsuit going forward. It's just a matter of time. So at this point, we have filed a lawsuit. TEPCO will have an opportunity to respond to the lawsuit. Meanwhile, we will be stressing to TEPCO and urging them to go to settlement, to set up some kind of a fund to take care of the medical needs of these sailors. The primary goal of this lawsuit is to create a fund for the medical treatment of these sailors. The question is, what is in the best interest of these American sailors, first responders, who went in to provide humanitarian aid? And what is in their best interest is to make sure that their health care is taken care of, to make sure that their children's health care and their offsprings are taken care of. And that's the purpose of this lawsuit. We will leave no stones unturned to accomplish that goal.
You spoke of TEPCO, and I've had an opportunity to read the lawsuit, and there is an extensive section in there that gives the history of TEPCO's malfeasance in the nuclear industry that I, quite frankly, found shocking because a lot of it is information I've not encountered through Nuclear Hot Seat and the other research that I have done. Can you speak to that aspect of the case that you are building?
Yes. Since the very construction of TEPCO back in the 60s, TEPCO was engaged in negligent conduct. It was negligently constructed. It was negligently designed. It's been negligently maintained since the inception, and all of that negligence has resulted in a host of various injuries and accidents. For example, back in 1981, 300 workers were exposed to excessive levels of radiation. And December of 1995, there was a radiation exposure resulting from extensive damage to one of the reactors. In March of 1997, 37 workers were exposed to radiation. In 1999, there was a malfunction at the nuclear plant that resulted in uncontrolled radiation release resulting from an explosion in one of the reactors. Again, in 1999, there was another radiation exposure. In 2000, there were cracks in the plants where the pipes were leaking radiated contaminated water. And so there's been a history each year, 2002, 2006, right on up to 2011 to this particular incident. So there's more than 10 incidents of negligent conduct resulting in radiation exposure and on some of those occasions, injuries to the workers at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. TEPCO has had problems after problems. Meanwhile, they're making billions on selling electricity to Japan, lining the pockets of their shareholders. But at the same time, they are destroying the environment. They are killing their workers. And now they have harmed the U.S. sailors, these good Samaritans that went in to help, by concealing that at the time, before these sailors went in, TEPCO was experiencing a triple meltdown. They had 3 reactors that were in active meltdown that occurred within 5 hours of the earthquake on March 11, 2011. And they concealed that information from the public. They concealed it from the United States Navy. They completely lied and allowed the Navy to believe that there was no radiation exposure, that there was no release. Meanwhile, they were dumping 300 tons of radioactive contaminated water into the Pacific, knowing that these sailors were jumping into the water, rescuing people. The ships were taken on the water, desalinated water, taking the salt out of it, and then sailors were bathing in the water, drinking the water, cooking with the water, brushing their teeth with the water. So they essentially exposed these sailors in 3 ways. 1, through the air, 2, through the water, by dumping this radioactive water into the Pacific, and 3, the fact that the sailors used this water to cook their food with, they were also putting it directly into their bodies. Meanwhile, now, 3 years later, we have sailors again with leukemias, with thyroid cancers, with testicular cancers, women with all kinds of uterine problems, young 21, 22, 23-year-old kids with brain tumors, pilots who had perfect vision, flying planes now are blind from tumors on the brain. The cluster of injuries here are way beyond a mere coincidence and way beyond what you would see in a normal population of people. Say on one ship, out of 5,500 sailors on the Reagan, you would not see such a cluster of these kinds of illnesses in this particular small population that we see. On the other hand, we do see this when it comes to radiation exposure. We saw it at Chernobyl. We've seen it when there is a major exposure to radiation, as what occurred here on March 11, 2011 with the Fukushima meltdown.
As you're saying this, of course, I'm overwhelmed with such rage. And having been at 3 Mile Island myself, I know what I went through, and there's not even any proof that I had direct radiation exposure, but if nothing else, the fears and the pressure and the stress that resulted, the post-traumatic stress, was horrific. So anybody who went through this, whether they have a symptom or not, definitely is under stress, and stress is impacting their health. From what you're saying about this lawsuit, it's almost as if the nuclear industry and nuclear technology itself is going to be on trial. Have you had that sense of it from the work you've been doing?
Absolutely. And we intend to put the nuclear industry on trial here because it is the misrepresentation from the nuclear industry that nuclear energy is safe that has allowed this particular incident to occur. There's this false sense of security that these for-profit energy companies such as TEPCO has created in the public. The public believes that, these power plants are totally safe. In fact, TEPCO guaranteed the Japanese public that this particular power plant was safe, concealing the fact that, one, they built the plant right on an earthquake fault, and that they had literally cut down a mountain, a hill. It wasn't really a big mountain, but it was a significant elevation. They had cut it down so that they could build the plant right down at the water level, at the ocean level, right in the path of the tsunami. The true fact is that these power plants are not safe. You cannot God-proof these plants. You can't make a plant that will withstand the wrath of the environment when it comes to earthquake or tsunamis. And because of that fact, these nuclear power plants threaten the world. The entire planet is threatened. Right now, as we speak, there is a radiated landmass the size of Texas floating in the Pacific, and it undoubtedly is going to hit the northern coast of California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, probably by the end of this year, beginning of next year. This kind of contamination threatens the entire planet, and it had left an entire generation of young people now crippled, genetically as well as mentally as well as physically. As you well know, radiation doesn't just affect the person. It causes genetic mutation, so it affects the offspring. It affects the children of an irradiated person. So the harm and damage here to the human beings is far-reaching, let alone considering the damage to the environment, which is ongoing. TEPCO is still releasing 300 tons of radiation-contaminated water.
That's every day. That's what they release.
Every day. And it's been going on every day, as stated in the lawsuit, since March 11, 2011, since the earthquake happened. This is a very serious problem. So, yes, this lawsuit indicts not only Tokyo Electric Power Company, but it indicts the entire nuclear industry. And it requires that citizens of the world demand that these power plants actually be shut down because it is impossible to make them completely safe.
It's been clear that the most consistent media coverage you've gotten outside of the anti-nuclear movement has been coming from the military media, from the Navy Times, from Stars and Stripes, from publications like that. What, if any, support have you gotten from military organizations, support organizations such as veterans groups?
To date, we have not received any support from veterans groups or from any military groups, except the Stars and Stripes military newspaper, which has been quite active in publishing stories about this lawsuit. We do plan to send this lawsuit to Congress. We're going to send it to members of the Senate. We're going to send it to the Secretary of Defense as well as the President of the United States. We are going to insist that our government first address these sailors' needs. We're going to insist that the government look and focus their attention on what is in the best interest of these sailors. Right now, the sailors cannot sue the military. They're prohibited by law from suing the military. And the military, the Navy, has started a registry to detail and record the various symptoms and illnesses of these sailors, but they discontinued that registry after about 6 to 8 months. So now there's no registry. So right now we need to push, and we need the public to push the United States government to require the veterans associations or the various hospitals to treat these sailors. They need treating, and they need the United States Navy and the United States government to pay for this medical treatment. It's very, very expensive medical treatment. These are young people who cannot afford to pay for the kind of expensive medical treatment that they are going to need. So we need the government to step in and provide that treatment.
It's my understanding that Congress actually issued, it wasn't an order, but it was a strongly worded suggestion to the military that this be followed up on and that it made certain that the sailors are getting the medical help that they need. And the response, this was something I covered on Nuclear Hot Seat in the last week, I believe. The response was that it was being taken very seriously by the military, by the VA. Are you familiar with that?
I am very familiar with that, and we are extremely encouraged. That just happened a couple of weeks ago where Congress included it into the latest budget bill for there to be an investigation as to what happened to these U.S. sailors, first responders, who are now sick from this Fukushima disaster. It is because of that interest that we are now going to send this lawsuit along with some declarations from our clients and medical records and encourage Congress to take action to treat these sailors through the VA or through some kind of fund that they will establish, that Congress should establish for them to seek medical care through the private system. But yes, Congress is now finally on board in expressing an interest in this case.
What can those of us who are on the outside of the military do to support the work that you're doing and support these sailors who so desperately need every bit of help they can get?
We need the public to contact members of Congress, contact their local elected representatives, contact President Obama, and also send letters to anyone in government and explain that these young sailors, these first responders, need medical help. They need their medical bills paid. They need medical monitoring for the rest of their lives. Their children's health must be monitored. And this has to be an ongoing treatment modality, as I mentioned, because of the genetic mutations that we talked about earlier. So the sailors at risk, their children are at risk, and these health problems will last for 50 to 100 years. These radioactive particles stay alive, and they remain in your body until they cause some kind of mutation of the genes and create cancer. So people very simply then contact their government representatives, starting with the local government and moving all the way up to the President of the United States. And that's what we need them to do.
Well, Nuclear Hot Seat will certainly be supporting that. We'll be sending our own letters off and encouraging those of our listeners who are here in the United States. It's an international program, but for those of us here in the United States, to write the letter to your senators, your representatives, deal with whoever you can get to in Congress. And if you are a veteran, go through your veterans organization and let them know that this is something that is affecting the veterans from what is called Operation Tomodachi, which means friend, and that was the code name for it, and get these sailors the support that they need for the rest of their lives and their children's lives as well.
Absolutely. It's quite ironic that the word Tomodachi means help our friends. Now, these particular sailors, these first responders, these good Samaritans who went in to help Japan as our friends, they now need Japan's help. Japan needs to help their friends, help these sailors by, number one, admit that they have responsibility for the exposure of these sailors, and two, to set up a fund to take care of the medical needs of these sailors, and number three, stop opposing this lawsuit which is seeking medical help for these first responders.
Well, I wouldn't hold my breath for that last one to come through because they're really fighting on behalf of a very nuclear-minded industry, company, and even Prime Minister of Japan right now. So it sounds like you've got a battle on your hands, but I'm willing to put my money on you and the sailors because the cause is just, the cause is true. They have been harmed. They need to be recognized, acknowledged, and supported into the future for as long as it takes.
Absolutely. That is our goal. What is in the best interest of these sailors is our mission. That is what we will accomplish, and we need your help, and we really appreciate you, Libbe, for all that you do. And we need the help of the American public and the help of the people in the world to make sure that these sailors are taken care of, first and foremost, and to make sure that this does not happen again. We cannot afford to have another disaster like the Fukushima nuclear power plant meltdown that occurred on March 11, 2011. We can't afford that to happen ever again in this planet.
From your mouth to somebody in power's ears.
Okay.
Charles Bonner, thank you so much for again being our guest on Nuclear Hot Seat.
Thank you very much, Libbe, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Please keep it going.
Don't worry, I won't be stopping anytime soon.